for this session, and I welcome you all on behalf of all my team of Thapar Mathematical Society. This is the first session of the this year which we are organizing, and this is first online session actually that we are organizing. And so this is, I mean, everything considering bad happening due to COVID-19, but this is probably one good thing that we have found one more technological tool by which we can connect, and although it was already existing, but maybe now we are more comfortable to use that. So beside other things which has created a lot of problem for the people, so on this note that there is something good even in these bad times. So I welcome you all for this session on journey of an engineer towards becoming a mathematician for Dr. Atul Dikshit. This is organized by Thapar Mathematical Society, and I really appreciate everybody's presence, and I'm still expecting many more participants who will join during this session. I request all of you to keep yourself muted, and if you have any questions to be asked from Dr. Dikshit, I'll request you to keep your questions, hold it with you till the end of the talk. And if you can write that in the chat box, it will be much more convenient for me to ask on your behalf. If you're so keen to ask this question by yourself, even then I would request you can write it in the chat, you can write down your name, and then maybe once I ask the question on behalf of the others, we'll give you the chance to ask that question. And we'll definitely try to accommodate every question of the participant. Thapar Mathematical Society has started in 2016 in Thapar, because we see that there are many students who are very much enthusiastic in mathematics. Although this institute, TIT, it's an engineering institute, but still we have a school of mathematics where the people are rigorously doing research in mathematics. And we have MSc program also, PhD scholars. So in TMS, specifically in Thapar Mathematical Society, we have a mixed community. We have undergraduate student, we have postgraduate student, and we have PhD scholars, faculty, and even some of the volunteers who are not directly related with the mathematics, but still they are part of our society, and we always find some motivation or the other motivations from them. So we aim to raise mathematical literacy by doing various activities, sometime quizzes, sometime, just expert talks, sometime public lectures. So that's how we have grown up in these 4 years, and we have realized that, there are a lot of things that even after spending a huge amount in career, you still find that, oh, I have not learned these many things. So there are a lot of motivations available, within our community. So today I want to welcome Dr. Dikshit, and I want to make aware my audience currently that Dr. Dikshit is currently Assistant Professor of Mathematics at IIT Gandhinagar. He did his bachelor's in computer engineering from University of Mumbai in 2004, then master's in mathematics from Texas Tech University, USA in 2006, followed by a PhD in mathematics from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA in 2012, and this is the place actually where I met him for the first time. So that's a nice memory of the time. After his PhD, he did his postdoctoral studies at Tulane University, USA from 2012 to 2015. Upon finishing his postdoctorate study, he returned to IIT to join IIT Gandhinagar as Assistant Professor of Mathematics. Dr. Dikshit's research interests are in analytic number theory, special functions, theory of partitions, Q-series, and modular forms. He also liked to work in the area of mathematics developed by Srinivasa Ramanujan. He has written 47 research papers in mathematics so far. He is an editor of Journal of Ramanujan Mathematical Society, as well as the Mathematics Student. In 2017, Dr. Dikshit gave 28th Hansraj Gupta Memorial Award lecture at the 83rd Annual Conference of the Indian Mathematical Society. Beside mathematics, he is passionate in music. Dr. Dikshit sings semi-classical Indian. So I would be happy to hear some of the words during the end of the talk, if Sir permits. And he plays tabla. He also likes to compose music. Dr. Dikshit, I'm extremely thankful from the bottom of my heart, and also on behalf of all my team, for accepting this invitation. And I welcome you for this session. You are already a host now. Maybe you can just share your screen, and in case you want to start a few words before you actually come to your presentation, you're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Anna, for this kind introduction, and thank you all for gathering here to to see this experiential talk where I'll be sharing some of my experiences as to how I came into mathematics, what led, how were the circumstances that actually led me into engineering and then back to mathematics. So I would like to just have this informal discussion with you all, as you may say. Is my screen visible?
Yes, your screen is visible to us.
Okay. Thank you all. So I would like to first start with my school years and as a teenage boy interested in mathematics, how I um came across various works, and then that led me to shape my career. I mean, those were the things that shaped up my career. So, and then I'll proceed to engineering and then back to mathematics. Okay, so here is an overview. So, major events in my academic career from school to engineering, and turning point in my academic life. So, choice of career and postgraduate education in mathematics. Initial struggles as a PhD student and postdoctoral fellow in mathematics. Now, as an assistant professor managing various roles, researcher, teacher, supervisor, and mentor. And then some takeaways from this lecture. Now, one thing that I would really like to say is that this is something maybe just not applicable to all. I mean, the career trajectory that I had, or some of the decisions that I took, perhaps were unique to me, and for others, it may not be applicable. It may not be even better, or there might be some better decisions that some other people may take, and then have more nicer career trajectory. So this is just something that is my experience so far that I would like to share with you all. And the takeaways from these lectures I'll mention towards the end. But if you have any questions, then yeah, we'll also look at those questions at the end. So at least as far as I know, mathematics has always been my favorite subject since my school, at least from 5th standard. And in 10th standard, there was something called as D group problems, which were very hard problems. And the board exams were really having these problems, newly introduced A, B, C, and D level problems. And the most interesting for me was to try to solve as much D group problems as I could. So that's where I think my love for mathematics grew. And then exploring books other than mathematics, because I mean, in schools, basically it was trying to see whether you are in the top 1 or 2 or 3, and whether or not you understand the concepts and all. I mean, especially in other subjects, I mean, that was not much of a concern. It was only later in 10th standard onwards that I realized that, okay, I mean, it's not just for securing marks that we should be studying. And apparently, things happened in such a way that I I got into reading some really very good books, and that actually brought me out of this uh, rat race for securing highest marks, as you may say. So during that time, my favorite subject was Euclidean geometry. Of course, as a high schooler, you don't really get to study all of the major topics in mathematics. Whatever is introduced to you during the school, you try to learn as much as that. So I learned Euclidean geometry, and that was really my passion at that time. And I particularly geometry of the triangle, and I was in love with the various triangle centers. For example, of course, everybody knows about orthocenter, centroid, and then circumcenter and incenter. Those are the 4 triangle centers that everybody knows. But there are many more interesting points which are there inside a triangle, and that really fascinated me. During my 12th grade, it was the love for integrals. When I got into calculus, it was trying to solve toughest integrals, and that was that is what constituted mathematics for me at that time. But then very soon after my 12th grade, I actually got an engineering mathematics book from one of my neighbors, and there I came across some function, some integrals, which I did not know about, and those were really fascinating. And the first one was Euler's gamma function, written as an integral, as a Mellin transform of exponential function. The other one was Euler's beta function, and then I saw that you can do something like 0 to infinity x to the 7 upon 7 to the x dx. I mean, that was really something that I never ever came across as a 12th grade student. And so that really fascinated me. So I started reading all of the chapters from that engineering mathematics book. I mean, at that time I had just finished my 12th grade, and I was just into reading some other books rather than the textbooks and all. But the integrals was my love at that time in 12th grade, you may say. In 12th standard, actually, I really took another path. So up to 10th, it was to fight for marks, to try to become a topper or second topper or third topper, whatever, in the top 3. But then really in 12th standard, this love for mathematics overtook that competitive spirit. And I really was not concerned at all about how many points I would be getting. It's a very important year of my life, 12th grade. After that, everybody is going to start their undergraduate education. So he or she must study just the topics that are there in the 12th grade. I really did not care about that. So I started reading various books in mathematics. So I started with the one which was Katha Hi Ganitachi. This is what is in Marathi. So it is like the story of mathematics, which had biographies of various mathematicians such as Gauss, Legendre, Cauchy, and other famous ones. And that really fascinated me. Then the turning point, as you may say, was when I came across this book. So this was the biography of Ramanujan in Marathi that I read. So the literal translation of the title of this book would be Srinivas Ramanujan, The Making of a Mathematician. So I was really, really moved on going over his life history and to see that how someone who was so poor, I mean, who did not, I mean, who came out of poverty, was so passionate about mathematics that he did not care about anything else. And he actually did so much that even the finest minds, even now, are trying to even fathom and try to see where these are applied. So that really impacted me a lot. This was back in, I would say, 99 or 2000. So then in my 12th grade, actually, I had ordered a copy of Collected Papers of Srinivas Ramanujan. So I had read this biography. I was very interested, and I saw okay, there are these collected papers. So let me go over it and let me try to see what I could understand from there. So I was thrilled to see so many new integrals that I could just not understand, but just looking at them, I was marveled by their beauty. And I could understand very little of what was given there. So the only thing was to just go over the pages and see what kind of mathematics Ramanujan has done. And even doing that really was a very thrilling experience for me. I did not understand. And now when I look back, I see that those incidents actually were setting up my career path slowly, without me knowing it consciously. I still remember we had a blackboard mounted on a wall in our main room, and I just wrote the 17 series for 1 over pi that Ramanujan had given in his paper, Modular Equations and Approximations to Pi. So they were series for 1 upon pi written as a hypergeometric function, and which had very high rate of convergence. Okay, so they converged very fast to 1 upon pi. Not that I knew nothing about it. I mean, not that I knew anything about this rate of convergence or anything, but it was just the sheer beauty that compelled me to write on the board all these 17 series for 1 over pi. And I used to just look at those, and somehow that created an interest in this type of mathematics for me right from my 12th grade. So my love for triangle geometry still existed, but now there was another contender to it: special functions and Ramanujan's mathematics. As I moved further in calculus, as I said, I was really intrigued by various integrals, and I was passionately fond of solving difficult integrals, and that actually led me to uh, even Ramanujan's mathematics. Because even in the biography of Ramanujan, you cannot get away without having the integrals that he has evaluated. Okay, there are some many fascinating ones that are there in the first letter that Ramanujan wrote to Hardy. And so in that biography, there were these ones, and slowly I came to this area. I always wanted to become a mathematician. So I even enrolled for a bachelor's program in mathematics at Ruia College, which is affiliated to University of Mumbai. I was going there for 1 month, but all of my friends were going for engineering, and they were surprised, why am I not going for engineering? So they said, you at least apply. It need not be the case that you have to go for engineering, but you at least apply. Why are you even not applying? And then, I mean, in future, if you getting into engineering is a very difficult thing, so you may not even get into engineering. But I had a good score in my 12th grade that I got into engineering. So I really did not apply out of any genuine interest. I mean, it was the very last day of application in Mumbai. I remember there was a 5-kilometer queue from VJTI, which is one of the main colleges for engineering in Maharashtra. From that institute all the way until various roads that existed there. So there was about 5-kilometer queue, and I was there. It was right from the previous night that we all had to stay in queue and then apply. And I just, for fun, I applied for engineering without knowing that I would be going for a bachelor's program in engineering. I absolutely had no intentions to join an engineering program. So it so happened that I got into computer engineering. So really, it was out of 2 streams that I had to choose: electrical engineering and computer science. Or computer engineering. But then I wanted to choose that branch of engineering which was closest to mathematics. And so I chose computer engineering. My one of my mentors, Tambe sir, he actually told me that even if you are going into bachelor's in engineering, you can actually come back to mathematics. You can do MS in US in mathematics and then PhD in mathematics. And so it was ingrained in my mind that, okay, this is the path that I have to follow. Not that I was aware about various options that were there. It was just that, okay, he has told me to go like this, and so I will be, after my bachelor's in computer engineering, I will be doing MS and PhD. So that's what was there in my mind. Now, when I see people who are so motivated right from their 12th grade, they know exactly where to go, what to do. That wasn't the case, unfortunately, in my time. So it was really good that my teacher in mathematics, Nambe sir, he actually had this advice given to me. So as I said, I went into computer science, and I just wanted to write it here that I wasn't pressurized at all by my parents nor by any of my friends. It was just that all of them were going to engineering, and so I also decided to go. Now, when I look back, I see that, okay, I had so little knowledge about my own career, how I want to shape it up. Because, as I said, I mean, if you see people now, after the 12th grade, they have a very clear picture as to what they want to do. If they do not, then also when they switch paths from one stream of engineering to a pure science subject or the other way around, they know exactly what is available there. And unfortunately, I did not know that. So, but anyway, when I look back, I see that, okay, I did not lose because of that. Whatever happens, happens for good. So I'm of that belief. So how was my engineering career? So it was from 2000 to 2004. The first 5 semesters I really liked, because in each semester I had one course in mathematics, applied mathematics 1 through 5. And there were many things in there that I really liked. May not be rigorous enough, but these were some things in mathematics that I was learning and I really liked it. And even in the 6th semester, we had one course in discrete mathematics. That really was a very interesting course for me, because that was the first time I got introduced to groups, rings, posets, set theory, various subjects, a little bit of combinatorics. I really appreciated groups and rings, and I really had abstract algebra as my favorite subject then. It was only part of it. I mean, so what would you say? I mean, during my bachelor's in this one course on discrete mathematics, we did not even discuss about normal subgroups. But there was this book that we were following, Coleman and Busby, which was a very good book on discrete mathematics, and it had a lot of further material. So I just kept on reading that and went to normality and various other things, and really that fascinated me. So most of the semesters in my engineering, I have just concentrated on mathematics, whether it was Euclidean geometry or whether it was special functions or Ramanujan's mathematics. I just tried to understand from my side. Or another aspect was to try to do research in Euclidean geometry. So back in my 12th grade itself, I had joined one Yahoo group. Now Yahoo groups do not exist that much, but there was a Yahoo group on triangle geometry that I was a part of, where geometrists from all around the world were doing research on Euclidean geometry and then posting their results. And then slowly there was a journal that arose out of it, Forum, Geometry Forum, that is still an existing journal. And I was really fascinated at that time to read all those messages, to go over what new theorems in Euclidean geometry I could do. And there was one triangle center that I discovered back in 2000, which is now included in the Encyclopedia of Triangle Centers. So I was into research, as you may say, but not the mainstream one. I did not know that this area was out of fashion back then. But nevertheless, that actually helped me gain analytical skills, because whether it is a subject which is more fashionable, which is more contemporary, or it is something which you are studying 200 years back, or you are doing research in an area which has been studied a lot, still studying that is studying mathematics, and studying mathematics leads you to having analytical skills develop. And that really helped me later on also when I went into mathematics. So while I never flunked in any of the subjects and I always had first class, and I even topped one of the semesters, I was really not interested in engineering. So I would say the basic problem was that of a mindset. So it was like a mathematician mind inside an engineer. So an engineer who was always haunted by mathematics. I would not even call myself as an engineer. I mean, as an effect, what do you say, a capable engineer, because after my engineering, I did not come back to engineering at all. I did appreciate a lot of things. So one thing that I would like to say, and that's why I said in the very beginning that this is the career trajectory that may be particularly limited to mine, and so it may not be applicable to all. Many of the decisions which I made may not be best for you, so everybody will act, but this is just my experience that yes, you can come back to mathematics even if you are going to engineering. So what I wanted to say was, I really do not undermine engineering at all. I mean, in fact, I really appreciate the topics that I learned there in my computer science. There was computer networks, there was digital signal processing, then how software engineering course, which actually helped me a lot, as I will say. 3 years down the line, it helped me a lot to continue my PhD. So I'll come back to it. So there were really very advantageous things of doing engineering program, but an engineer who is really passionate versus an engineering graduate who has just done an engineering degree but is not very much interested in engineering, there is a lot of difference between the two. Okay, so I was really not fit for being an engineer, though I never really had any problem in any of the exams. It was, I would not say it was very easy or something, but it was quite good. It wasn't any problem for me. So at that time, I remember until the second year of my engineering, I was still exploring triangle geometry. But at that time, there was no hint that I would go into number theory. So I would like to say how I really went into number theory. So here was the turning point in my life. So after my fifth semester, after my sixth semester, I started applying for, started studying for GRE and TOEFL. I really wanted to go into mathematics, but I was equally interested in music. So I come from a musical family. My mom is a Hindustani classical musician, and my dad is a tabla player. And as much as I was interested in mathematics, and even now I'm very much interested in music, and I did not know then whether I should go into music or in mathematics. So one of my friends, he actually told me, if you go into mathematics, you can still do music. However, if you go into music, then it will be very difficult for you to do mathematics. And I actually took his decision, and I said, okay, then I will go into mathematics. And then side by side, I will try to do my musical journey, however much I can do. So in my sixth semester, or seventh, I guess, I started preparing for GRE and TOEFL. And then I got admit from Texas Tech University for MS in mathematics. I think one of the reasons why I got full funding, that is teaching assistantship, because I had one paper in triangle geometry during my bachelor. So it was on something called as orthopoles and Pappus theorem. And so what I want to say here is that anything that you do at any point of time, it doesn't go waste. And it will always come back to help you in unseeming ways that you may not have ever imagined. So first of all, I did not want to go directly for a PhD because I did not have an undergraduate degree in mathematics. So I wanted to first do masters and then only wanted to go to PhD. Okay, so here is the most important part that I would say, because it was not all rosy for me when I decided to switch to mathematics. So I was all set to go to US, and it was the first time that I ever sat in a plane. And my parents, relatives, friends all came to the airport to bid farewell. I did not feel anything special at all because I was going to do some degree in the US or anything. Rather, I was worried because I did not know whether everything would go well because I did not have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. So the first thing that I did after I sat on my seat in the plane was to put my stuff in the overhead bin and then take out the book by James Munkres on topology and open it. And the page that came was on Nagata-Smirnov metrization theorem. Remember, here was someone who did not even know what an open set or a closed set is. And suddenly I was seeing this Nagata-Smirnov metrization theorem, and I was so afraid that I quickly closed that book, kept it again in my bag in the overhead bin, and I went to sleep. Because that was actually increasing my worry a lot, even more. So I was already afraid. I did not want to become more afraid at that time, just after boarding the plane. So the only thing that I carried with me, I would say, is the love for mathematics and the faith that, okay, I want to become a mathematician, and maybe things will be such that I will become a mathematician. So in my first semester at Texas Tech, I took this, what you would call baby real analysis, because the Royden's book on measure theory is what is called as Papa Real. So this is baby real. So I took real analysis from Rudin's book, and then complex analysis from John Conway, and then topology from Moncrief's book. And one advantage that I had was when I was studying topology of R from Rudin, at the same time I was studying topology of C from Conway, and at the same time I was studying topology of abstract spaces from Moncrief's book. So I could see how things develop as you go from metric spaces to abstract spaces. So the first 2 months did not go well. So as I said, I had never heard about any of the compact sets, connected sets, some esoteric things that I felt at that time. That were among them were Lebesgue's covering lemma, and I really did not understand all of the things. I mean, I was trying to understand it rigorously, but maybe it was just that I was not exposed sufficiently enough that I was facing somewhat difficulty in understanding them. So I came to know when I came to Texas Tech that the triangle geometry, which I was passionately following, was actually an extinct subject. I really feel pain when I say this because I still like it, but it's just that people do not have that subject in the mainstream mathematics right now. But except in mathematical Olympiads, it is not studied right now, and except in some geometers who are interested in the subject. So here is one really important incident that happened in my life. So one evening, I was doing complex analysis homework that our instructor had given from Conway's book. And I felt like, oh, I'm just not getting it. Probably I'll have to come back to India without having my degree. And I was alone at my apartment. I did not have any of my roommates to talk to me at that time. So I was feeling worried that I actually slept on my sofa with that thought in my mind. And then when I woke up, it was around 7 p.m. But then here was one important thing. I mean, the first thought, or whatever sequence of thoughts I had, the most prominent one among them was, I'm not going to quit. I must understand these concepts. I have come here long way to study mathematics. I'm not going back without my degree. So that was the thought that I had in my mind. And that very instance, I took my book, Conway book, and started reading right from the first page. And then I slowly started getting all those concepts. See, it takes time for someone who has just done engineering mathematics without the expected rigor to understand topological concepts, for example, right? So if you are exposed to it right from your bachelor's degree, it is good. But if you are not, like in my case, then immediately having a grasp on all these concepts is somewhat difficult. So that's what I was going through. But then I really got interested in all of these subjects because I started understanding these concepts, the topological ones and many other ones. And we were having this class test in real analysis, and I actually scored 100 out of 100 in that, and that really boosted my confidence. So we had a very, very good real analysis professor. He was a complex analyst, but also interested in special functions. So um, he told me that, okay, I still remember the first day of my uh, entering into the mathematics department. So I went to his office and I said, I'm interested in special functions. At that time, I had actually read about some things, especially about gamma functions and beta functions from Whittaker and Watson, which is one of the standard books for special functions, even now. So I went to him and I straight away said to him, I'm interested in special functions. And he said, okay, so go to the board. And then he gave me an unsolved problem. So, which is not even solved now. But anyway, so that was our first interaction. That's when, I mean, after my first semester of real analysis with him, that's when I actually decided that, okay, I will be working with him for my master's thesis. And he told me to read these chapters on theta functions and elliptic functions from the book Special Functions by Rainville. Rainville actually very lucidly explains all these concepts, and it's a very good book for a newcomer to go into these exciting areas, theta functions and elliptic functions. So I had two master's thesis advisors. The other one was Professor Solinin. He suggested a problem, a research problem on theta functions for my master's thesis. So I would like to tell this problem because it is also something that engineers will be interested in. So briefly, any talk on mathematics should not go without having no mathematical slides. Okay, so I would like to give this problem. So there was a problem, extremal problem on harmonic measure on radial slits. Forget about this. These are terminologies in complex analysis. So let me explain it in terms of engineering, or rather physics. So see here, I have this D as a stove. Imagine this is a stove, and it has a cooling circular boundary, and the cooling boundary has temperature 0 units. Okay, and inside this, I have these segments as heating elements. Okay, so these heating elements are all identical, which temperature, let's say 1. Now you want to maximize the temperature at the center. How should be the configuration? How should you place these heating elements so that the temperature at the center is maximized? You cannot put all of them from one end. That would provide a lot of heat from that particular end, but there will be a cooling effect coming from the other side. Okay, so what does our engineering intuition tells us? Okay, perhaps the most symmetric one is the best one. Okay, now you can actually, this problem comes from complex analysis, and on the next slide I have its description, which I'll probably try to avoid in terms of complex analysis language. But what is really happening is that you are looking at these compact sets, and in general, if you have these closed intervals which may touch the boundary or which may not, only in certain instances the solution is known that yes, it is indeed the most symmetric configuration is that one which maximizes the temperature, but it's not known in general for any compact set. Remember, a compact set can be very weird, for example a Cantor set, right? So in general case, this is still an open problem. So what this let me not go over this because it will take a lot of time, but what really I'm interested in this, you take K as a compact set and then you take its rotations. Okay, you have n heating elements, right? So you rotate this by e to the 2 pi I K over n, and K goes from 1 to n, and that will be the symmetric way of arranging these heating elements, right? This actually boils down to some problem in theta functions, which was the master's thesis problem for me. So the Jacobian theta functions, there are 4 of them. Basically, if you remember just the third one here, theta 3, all others can be constructed from this one. Okay, so this is given by this infinite series 1 plus 2 times summation q to the n square cosine 2 pi nz, where your q satisfies mod q less than 1, or q is given by either I pi tau with imaginary part of tau positive. Okay, z is any complex number. So if I take z equal to 0, then let's say this cosine becomes just 1. So this 1 plus 2 times this sum can be actually written as summation n equal to minus infinity to infinity q to the n square, which is one of the Ramanujan's theta functions, as people may recall, and for which there is a very nice product representation. Okay, so those I will call by theta I. So whenever I put z equal to 0, I'll have theta 1, theta 2, theta 3, theta 4, just representing this theta I of 0 comma tau. So I'll be suppressing this variable tau. Okay, theta 1 is clearly 0 because you have sine of 0 as 0. So the problem was concerning certain special quotients of Jacobian theta function. So you take this tau, which had imaginary part of tau positive, to be this specific type, I pi tau. So on the imaginary axis, okay. So real part of t is positive. I mean, in general, you can take t also to be complex, but if t is real, then you are talking about a purely imaginary number, so on the complex imaginary axis. So we define these quotients Sj to be quotients where the first argument might change, u over 2 and then v over 2, okay. And then the theorem that we proved was that this S1 and S4 are positive and monotonically increasing, strictly increasing, as a function of t on the positive real line, I mean from 0 to infinity, whereas S2 and S4 were positive and strictly decreasing. So this, at the end of my master's period, we submitted this paper to Journal of Math Analysis and Applications, and it got published in 2007, so maybe a year and a half later. So this was one of the most fruitful projects I have worked on, because I will say in the next few slides as to what this really got me into. So the third part of my third semester and the whole fourth semester of my master's was one of the most enjoyable periods for me in my life. So that was from October 2004 through May 2005. This was the one where I started learning in depth about theta functions, elliptic functions, and from there I naturally got into Q series, partitions, and then once you come into Q series and partitions, you actually come to Ramanujan. So you cannot avoid Ramanujan when you get there. So I came back to Ramanujan after 6 years, like from 12th standard when I got into collected papers of Ramanujan. I mean, just going over those to actually encountering some of the results that Ramanujan had worked on. So here is where I learned about Q binomial theorem, Lebesgue's identity, or Heiner's transformation, all those things which are the basic fundamental concepts in the theory of partitions and Q series. So even back then, I had no idea that I was actually studying number theory or a part of number theory. Okay, it was through analysis, because my master's thesis advisors both were complex analysts, and so it was through the complex analysis that and my love for special functions, that I actually came into Q series and partition. So that period was really very special for me. I mean, it was that period of my life where I wanted to be alone, not because I was depressed or anything, but I wanted to really work on these areas, because it was kind of you go to a sweets shop full of chocolates. You as a small kid, you are given an entry into a shop which is full of chocolates, and then you are just so fascinated by various chocolates that you have. Something similar happened to me, and so I really tried to work on as much as I could in these areas. So here is one of the photos that I found this afternoon on my graduation. So now I'll briefly say about doctoral program and my postdoctoral research. Okay, so I always intended to be either a mathematician or a musician, as I said. So as far as mathematics is concerned, I always wanted to be a professor. So I was simply not someone who would become who would go into industry, or I did not have that acumen that I would be doing good if I go into industry or a software company. No, I was always meant to be a professor. And I loved research. So I really wanted to go for a PhD in mathematics. So which universities did I apply? Only those universities where I could at least see at least one person working in the area of Ramanujan's mathematics. So for example, I applied to Penn State because George Andrews was there. I applied to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign because Bruce Bent was there. Similarly, there were many other institutes. I applied to University of Wisconsin because Richard Askey was there. So those I looked at who all people were there in areas related to Ramanujan's mathematics, and those are the only universities I would apply. Again, let me say that this might be, one should only see this from the point of view of my career trajectory. Okay, if you are interested in some area of mathematics which has no connection whatsoever with the mathematics of Ramanujan, no problem, just pursue that area. Okay, you should only pursue that which is passionate for you. Okay, so I decided to join, or rather, Professor Byrne took me as his PhD student. I was very fortunate that he took me. So that was one of the most fruitful periods of my life, from 2006 through 2012. So as I said, while working on my master's thesis on Q series partitions, I did not know that that constitutes part of number theory. Okay. See, back in my bachelor's days, I did not have any course in pure mathematics as such, except for that discrete mathematics course, you may say. And then I did not even take any elementary course in number theory before. During my end of my master's, I had taken a reading course with a professor who was a number theorist, and we studied first 2 or 3 chapters from Apostle. I would say only first 2, Apostle's Introduction to Analytic Number Theory. That's it. So I did not really know what all constitutes number theory. So during maths Olympiads, when I was a part of, I did have number theory, but at that time, as I said, I was only interested in geometry. So I did not pay any attention to number theory. And that was the period when I was not concerned about whether I would be selected in maths Olympiad or not. I just tried to pursue what I really liked, and that was geometry. So after I did my master's thesis, part of it was on one inversion formula in the cubic theory of elliptic functions. Remember, Ramanujan has a very beautiful paper on elliptic functions where he just has 3 lines written that it appears that there are, or I don't really remember the words, but there are other alternative theories of elliptic functions than just the classical theory. Something to that effect. Only 2-3 lines he says that actually has grown into a beautiful area now. It is called Ramanujan's alternative theories of elliptic functions. So the classical theory of elliptic functions would correspond to what you would call as signature 2. Then there is a signature 3 theory, which is cubic theory. And I had studied one result from the cubic theory of elliptic function, one inversion formula for complete elliptic integral. And so I was really fascinated by that, and I joined PhD program with Professor Byrne to work on cubic theory. So I always decided that, okay, this will be my PhD thesis. I mean, this is what will be I'll be working on for my PhD thesis. But destiny had some other things in mind. So one fine afternoon, I was walking from mathematics department to Coble Hall. I might be in I was just completing my second year of PhD. And I was stopped on the road by one of my mathematical brothers. When I say that, I mean Boonrod, this person was also a student of my supervisor. So he stopped me on the road and he said that, are you not planning to attend Professor Byrne's talk on unsolved problems in Ramanujan's Lost Notebook? And I said, thank God you reminded me, because I completely forgot. Okay, let's go together. So I went there, and Professor Byrne had one formula written on the blackboard. So here is this formula. Let me describe this. So most of you, or many of you, may have heard about gamma function, Euler gamma function. So if you take its logarithmic derivative, it is called as the digamma function or psi function. It is given by this infinite series, and this Euler constant is also involved. If you look at how the asymptotic expansion of psi of x is as x tends to infinity, then the first 2 terms in there, or rather the first term, is minus 1 by 2x plus log x. So if you take that on the other side, then that will be plus 1 by 2x minus log x, right? So you form this, that becomes lambda of x. And that actually, in terms of asymptotic big O estimate, it is big O of 1 by x square. So if it is big O of 1 by x square, if you replace x by n times alpha, this will be big O of 1 by n square. I mean, alpha comes in the constant. When you have big O of 1 by n square, you can actually form an absolutely convergent series, right? So that's what is this series consisting of, an absolutely convergent series consisting of this expression, where x becomes n alpha, n goes from 1 to infinity. Then you add to it some residual terms involving the Euler's constant, and there's logarithm, and you call this expression as f of alpha. Then what does Ramanujan claim on page 220? He says that if alpha and beta are two numbers such that their product is 1, so in other words, beta is 1 by alpha, then f of alpha is f of 1 by alpha. Just see this expression. How many times does it happen in our life in mathematics where we have, let's say, f of x and that equals f of 1 by x? Very few, right? So Ramanujan is saying that, okay, this is what you get, and that is not the only thing. That is also equal to this particular integral, which involves the Riemann-Psi function. Now, I won't go into all these definitions, but Riemann-Psi function is constructed from the Riemann-Zeta function. So you would probably say that this was my first research introduction to number theory or analytic number theory that I had. So one thing, I don't want to go into details in this, but you see, suppose I prove f of alpha equals this integral, okay? See, the only place where alpha appears is here in the cosine. And when I replace alpha by 1 by alpha, so f of 1 by alpha will be here, f alpha will change to 1 by alpha. What is log 1 by alpha is minus log alpha. And then cosine of minus theta is cosine theta. So you get back the same integral. So f of 1 by alpha should be equal to f of alpha. So once you prove the equality of the extreme expressions, you get this thing for free. Now, coming back to the lecture by Professor Byrne, I was really fond of gamma functions, as I have mentioned before. So the moment I saw this, the next instance, I decided that I should quit whatever I'm working on right now, and I should just focus on this particular problem. He said that this was an unsolved problem. Nobody has solved it yet. Ramanujan, of course, may have solved it, but there was no proof given in the last book. So our job is to give the proof. And I really stopped everything that I was working on. And for 2 weeks, I completely got absorbed into this particular one. And I was able to solve it after 2 weeks. Professor Byrne wasn't in town. I wrote to him saying that I have proved Ramanujan's result. And he was very, very happy. So this was probably just one such instance where I had worked with such integrals. And I did not know that this would actually become a topic of my PhD thesis. I was still all for working in elliptic functions. But circumstances happened in such a way that I was able to get analogs of this for Dirichlet L functions, that means the character analogs, and then for Hurwitz zeta function and more other formulas of this type. And naturally, it actually blossomed into a PhD thesis. So earlier, I was someone who wanted to really work into elliptic functions. I mean, not to say that I don't love them anymore. Of course, I do love them. But destiny had other things in mind. So my thesis was in these integrals of, so first part of my thesis, I would say, was in integrals of Riemann zeta function, and the other part was in partition theory. Certain partial differential equations which connect the rank generating function and the crank generating function. Those were the ones I studied. I mean, there was a 4th order differential equation that I studied. So, okay, some things about Professor Byrne. I'm really fortunate to have him as my PhD supervisor. I have learned many things from him, be it mathematics or things from everyday life. So here is one thing that I always say when I'm asked to speak about Professor Byrne, that he transformed me from being a toddler in mathematics into an aspiring young mathematician. So I was but a toddler there. And by toddler, I mean someone who had just seen various areas of mathematics, was kind of interested, but did not have any grasp on. But he was the one who really transformed me into someone who would then look for becoming a mathematician. Here is the photograph from my graduation. Here is Professor Brent here, my mom, and here's my wife. So very briefly, I know I'm running out of time. So is it okay if I go 2 or 3 minutes past 6?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay. Sure. So after my PhD, I did a 3-year postdoc at Tulane University. I was working with Professor Victor Moll. He's someone who works in computational number theory and special functions mainly. So I had a really nice experience there. He was very, I had complete freedom to do research, very less teaching duties, I would say, back then. And I collaborated with him, but he was very much okay with me collaborating with some other people as well. So it was really a nice time. So my wife and I always had plans to come back to India. So we came back for good in summer of 2015, and that's when I joined IIT Gandhinagar mathematics discipline. So how did this choice come of IIT Gandhinagar? So there was in 2012 that I was actually completing my PhD, and there was a young researchers meet at Stanford, which one of the mathematicians now at IISc Bangalore, who was back then a postdoc at Stanford, Apurva Khare, he was organizing. So that meet consisted of many people who were directors of various IITs, ICERs, IMSC, and other institutions, IISc, as well as some faculty members from these institutions who had come to attract people back to India. And it was just focused on mathematics and computer science. So already I had plans to come back to India. It wasn't after going to this conference that I decided that, okay, I'll come back to India. But this was just so that I get to know, okay, what all things, what all institutes we have and how are they working and all that. So I particularly remember our director, Professor Sudhir Jain's talk then. It was very, very impactful. And see, I joined IIT Gandhinagar back in 2015. So I applied for all these places maybe 9 months before. So back in 2012, I had heard his talk, but I was really very curious that I am going to apply to this place because I found the director very impactful and his speech was very impressive. So, okay, lastly, I would like to say, how am I managing the various roles now as a professor? See, once you are a PhD student, you are under the shadow of your supervisor, right? I mean, in a sense, I'm saying in a good sense that if you need his or her help, then he or she is always there to help you. Even in postdoc, you have your postdoctoral mentor where you can approach for help. Once you become a professor, I'm not saying you are all alone. Of course, you can actually communicate with various other people, but you have to now start your own program. So you have to conceive your own research projects. And I was doing that even when I was a PhD student or a postdoc, but it wasn't that even if a project that I conceive, whether I'll be able to completely solve it by myself, probably not. I have to collaborate it with other people because I don't have the necessary expertise. And that even works now because you cannot have expertise in everything, right? There are incredibly smarter people than you in every area of mathematics or in science, which you can really take help of, and that is always beneficial. But when I became an assistant professor here, then there were various roles, right? As a teacher, as a researcher, as a supervisor, as a mentor. So I remember that after my second semester here, I mean, in fact, during the second semester when I was teaching analytic number theory course here, one of my current PhD students, Rahul Kumar, he's about to finish his PhD this December. So he approached me whether I could take him as his, whether I could be his supervisor. And at that time, I was saying, okay, let us see how this course goes, and then perhaps we'll see at the end of the semester. Even though I have said this to him, part of the reason why I said this was because I myself was afraid. Now, I explain you the reason. See, here is where I would like to say some things in Hindi. So, it was similar to, probably this picture is not contemporary, but if you see in our previous generations, एक कोई दुल्हन रहती है जिस नई नवेली दुल्हन उसकी अभी अभी शादी हुई है, she was dependent on her parents. Now there comes some other people who are dependent, I mean her kids who are dependent on her. Okay, that was something that I experienced. Like I myself have just finished my PhD and my postdoc, I mean 3 years back, and now there is someone who would be working under my supervision. Will I be able to really guide him nicely? Will I be able to really do justice as a research supervisor? So that was various questions that were coming to my mind. And towards the end of that semester, I said yes to him. And I hope things have worked right after now. So this, being a supervisor, what I learned from my masters, that means not master's degree, my supervisors like Professor Burnt or any other people whom I read through books and got motivated, I decided that, okay, it is my duty now to pass on those qualities. But for that, you need to have those qualities. And I don't say that I have all those qualities. Even if we get 1% of what our supervisor has done, that would be still a great thing. So I try to imbibe in myself those great things that they have done and try to pass it on. As a mentor, as a postdoc mentor, so a year after I joined here, Dr. Vivekananda Machi, who might even be attending this talk and who is now an assistant professor at IIT Indore, he approached me for postdoc, for being his postdoctoral mentor. And it was just 2 or 3 months, or maybe even 1 or 2 months after Rahul approached me to be his PhD student. And I was like, okay, a year before I was a postdoc. And now there is someone who is coming to do postdoc with me. Will I be able to do justice? And but we had a very nice collaboration, Vivekananda and I, and I'm really thankful to him that he joined me when I was just starting my academic career. So I am enjoying all these roles as a researcher, as a teacher, as a supervisor, and as a mentor. So here is the final slide. There are 2 quotes, and then here is one thing that I would like to just say, that do career in what you're most passionate about. And you all know that where there is a will, there is a way. So you will definitely find a way. If you intend to go into a different branch later on, you should make a decision after thorough thoughts, and then you would have to be at most sincere, and then things will follow. You will see the path. Okay. And there are 2 other quotes. So one thing is one of my favorites from George Washington Carver, who was an agriculturist, American agriculturist, and an innovator. He said, start from wherever you are. Start with what you have. Make something out of it. Never be satisfied. When he says never be satisfied, he is saying never be complacent. That means you have achieved a lot and now there is no need for you. Okay, that is never the case. However much you may have achieved, there are always people who are greater than you. That is one thing that this quote tells us. And another quote is by Professor Ram Murthy. Many of you may be knowing him. He's a professor of mathematics at Queen's University. So here is the quote that he has written in one of the articles in Hardy Ramanujan Journal. So it is especially regarding how it is important to publish your research, but it applies to many other fields as well. So I'll just quote him. He says regarding publishing, what after all is the legacy we leave behind but for a written word? Our spoken words, our personalities all disappear like a lost fragrance in the vast ocean of time. It is only the written word that survives, which is but a faint shadow of what we have thought, of what we were, and of what we have learned. Yet, it is the only means by which we can transfer the torch of knowledge to the next generation, and after that to posterity. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Dikshit. I think it's really very indulging talk, I must say, because I thoroughly enjoyed, and this is one of the rigorous talk that I think somehow I got the glimpse that I'm listening Professor Agarwal again to some of the talk when you were speaking a lot about Ramanujan. So one thing that he's my supervisor, I heard a lot in, but he insists a lot of motivation, and somewhere that I found in you also. So when you spoke about Ramanujan, and especially this gathering when somebody who is not had done rigorous mathematics through a trained mathematics in undergraduate, postgraduate, so in that way, so even in that not going through that process, but learning the mathematics so rigorously, and listening your struggle is something that keeps on happening. And I think that's what made this talk very valuable and very interactive for my students as well as for me also. I would not take, maybe I would again like to thank before, once I'll take the question of the student. There are many questions I have received. So,
sure. I just want to say one thing, that yes, the only reason why I may have included sentences of this form that I scored 100 out of 100 or something, yes, is because yes, to give motivation to students. It is not because I did something great or anything, because I have seen in my life really, I mean, or I should not say this because I'm too young, but up to whatever I have seen so far, there are many great people who are incredibly smarter than me. But the only reason I said this was because some people from the institute at Papar, they may be wondering how we could do. And then here is an example that, okay, I did have difficulties initially. Even today, I think that my graph of mathematical learning is not linear. It has been highly non-linear. So there are some areas which are very basic, which I should be knowing that I don't know, or I make it a point that I should go back and learn. And there are some other areas, let's say, for example, this Euclidean geometry, which nobody now really studies, but which I have learned. I have put a lot of efforts in understanding those. So it has been very non-linear. So there is always a scope. Sometimes I feel, okay, there are these concepts that I should be knowing, but I really don't. And then I go back and then try to learn those. So just wanted to say about this.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, because I think this is what is the one hitch or one of the confusion that students usually have. There is a difference in solving a question when the student meet me. Sometime even we are doing mathematics. We call ourselves a mathematics faculty, but it's not always that the things are readily available and we can be good in all subjects. It's a process that we have to follow. I mean, we learn, we fail, we learn, and we fail. And I think this is what is one thing that we as a faculty and the student, we both are kind of a partner. Yes, there are many absolutely things when I guide my student, I learn so many things from them. So yeah, so this is what I always relish about this profession. So the first question that I want to take up is of Jaspreet Kaur. So I do not know whether she is a PhD scholar or master's, but the question is, so she mentioned masters. Being student of masters, I feel a lot of confusion regarding choosing subject or topic which I must choose for PhD. Can you please help me out for that?
Okay, so here I would say there are some students who are decided with their topic when they enter into their PhD program. So for example, for me, that was the case because in my master's thesis problem that I had learned, I was passionate about elliptic functions, theta functions. And so when I joined my PhD program, I knew that, okay, I would be working with Professor Berndt on this topic or something related to this. But there is another set of students who explore after they join the PhD program, and that is a very good idea. I mean, you explore for 1 full year or maybe even 3 semesters as to who is the professor you would like to work with, because it's not a matter of just 1 year or so, it's a matter of at least 5 years. So how is your rapport with the person? Not only that, even more than the person, the important thing is whether you like that area. Are you passionate about that area? So you can take time when you join your PhD program in the first 2 semesters or 3 semesters, take various courses and try to see which one you like the most, and then approach that professor. I mean, I would do that if I were in that other set. Yeah.
So even I would agree. I think it's about the subject. It's about the passion at all. So it doesn't matter. Sometimes students get depressed while taking admissions into master's or PhD program. That okay, now I'm not understanding. There's never a late time. There is always an open time. You can always make changes and decide. There's a second question from Abhimanyu. He want to ask directly to yourself. So I would request Abhimanyu, can you unmute yourself and maybe you can then ask?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, it was very nice to hear you. In fact, I could relate some of the parts to even my story as well.
Abhimanyu, can you just introduce briefly yourself, your branch, and then?
Yes, ma'am. I'm coming to that. So, sir, I'm currently in 4th year of electrical engineering,
Okay.
and so at the same juncture as where you were at some point in your life, where I have to take a decision what I have to do next.
Yes.
So I'm pretty confident that I want to go for higher studies and possibly to some good institute in US. And and the problem is that I'm slightly confused which path should I take. I have 1 paper in number theory along with ma'am Dr. Meenakshi Rana, and I have 2 papers in electrical engineering. So I'm in both fields. I have done some work in both fields. So which path should I really take?
I would again say follow your passion. You may even go into both, and there are interdisciplinary problems now. Both.
Sir, I'm slightly confused at this point that if it is one of my fears that if I enter into an environment where there are people from pure mathematics background who have learned mathematics in their BSc or other courses, and if I enter in such an environment, I might not be able to compete. During this course, when I did all my work or this 1 paper that I'm telling you about, there was no pressure on me. That is, if I just stopped doing it, it wouldn't have hurt me. But if I enter into a course and say master's or PhD, and there if I just stop getting any ideas, then what would I do?
So you can always take help of your fellow colleagues, right? I mean, in the sense that most of the people are good. So
Yes.
One mistake that I did when I went for my PhD, at that time in my first semester, I used to be all alone. I never really interacted with others, as opposed to what I did during my master's. Okay, back then we had a nice group where we used to discuss, and that was really helpful to me because all of them were coming from doing bachelor's degree in mathematics. I was the one who was not, and so that really helped me. I don't know why I did not do that in my first semester of PhD, and that did hurt me. But I would say you can discuss with other people about your problems. Also, you can solve them together and or have interactions. That will be really helpful.
Sir, if I put these problems in front of some teacher in electrical sciences, he is convinced that I could have a good, bright future in that direction. And when I discuss this problem with ma'am, and then she's convinced that I could do equally well in this direction as well. So,
doing both.
My father, like you told about Tambe sir, that he told you that you can go for engineering. In my case, it was my father who told me that engineering gives you a a scope that after 4 years you can still choose any path. So he still says on that you can take again engineering, and then lifetime you can do mathematics. In fact, most of my papers are all theoretical papers in electrical sciences. Like I've used Thiele's transform or gamma function and all in electrical problems. So he says that if you have such inclination, then pursue engineering with your own hint, with your own taste of mathematics.
Yeah, I would say now it is the what you would say, there is a blurred difference. I mean, there are a lot of interdisciplinary areas, even in electrical engineering and mathematics. Of course, everybody knows that there is a lot of intersection. In number theory, whether there is sufficient intersection, I do not have much idea, except that, of course, electrical engineers study a lot of Bessel functions, and Bessel functions are also part of what comes in number theory.
Yes, they do appear in various contexts. For example, your Z transform in electrical sciences is equivalent to the Q series in partition theory or another. So yes. I have done some analysis in this context as well, using results from number theory in a field where people don't even know.
Abhimanyu, you are not audible.
It seems that his voice is, there is some internet issue. We'll move forward to the next question. There is, I think, some Dr. Paso. He want to ask the question. Dr. Paso, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. This is Dr. Apaso from Mechanical Department. I am working as assistant professor in Thapar. Actually, I am from Maharashtra. And I missed my opportunity to study in mathematics, and I stuck up in engineering. I did my engineering from Walchand College of Engineering, Sangli. But in PhD, I tried to make it up by selecting my PhD thesis completely on mathematics. So I have one simple question which may be applicable to all the branches. Can we say that engineering is all about converting problems from respective discipline into mathematics and then solve it using mathematics? If it is yes, then how to strengthen this act?
I mean, at the core of any engineering discipline definitely is mathematics. Mathematics would be the language of any of the engineering disciplines. Even if it is converting that into mathematics problem, whether it boils down to that or not. So, I mean, I would say both engineering knowledge and mathematics knowledge, both are really important for an engineer because, for example, when I was doing my engineering, I lacked that. Maybe it was because I was not that passionate about doing engineering, but I had my friends for whom many of the things that were discussed made perfect sense, or they were very application oriented, and I wasn't. So when it came down to mathematical part of the engineering, I was very, very fine. But when it was about how the compiler works, or in the digital signal processing, when you are talking about, I even had a course on robotics and those kind of things. But now, is that not required? I would say no, that's not true. It is very much required because I did not know a lot that an engineer should have known. So, but yes, I mean, as you say, it boils down, mathematics would be the language of any of the engineering disciplines. And in order to strengthen this, I would say any engineer, even though he is doing or is familiar with applied mathematics, should also try to learn as much pure mathematics as possible, because that would actually develop the analytical skills which would actually help in solving the engineering problems as well. And after all, how is applied mathematics developed? Maybe coming from theoretical mathematics, and now it is both ways. Like we have machines like Mathematica and Maple, I mean computer algebra systems like Mathematica and Maple telling us that, okay, this particular problem or this particular conjecture is what must be true, and which is coming all the way from applied origin. It's through the computers that you are actually looking at, and that is giving you food for your problem in pure mathematics. So, I mean, I would say it should go both ways. A pure mathematician should also try to at least know some of the basic concepts in applied mathematics. And that's where actually those engineers who perhaps would like to go into mathematics or have to or want to be in touch with mathematics are at advantage, because they already have the applied scenario clear. And if they append that with the pure mathematics knowledge as much as possible, I'm not saying all of the things, but as much as possible, I think that would be really helpful. So that would involve studying like some of the basic books in pure mathematics. I hope I have answered your question, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your motivating talk.
Thank you, Apasa sir. The next question is of Bandhan Goyal. I'd like to tell you, I think I'm looking this student Bandhan. He is very active. He is doing his engineering program. I am not completely knowing exactly, but I've always seen Bandhan, roaming in maths department and being very enthusiastic student. Bandhan, maybe you want to introduce yourself, so go ahead. I always also seen him with the Astronomy Society. And the question he asked is, in addition to continuous practice, what the trick to memorize mathematics? Because one can't solve problem if they don't remember the possible paths to solution.
I don't know whether there is a universal trick to memorize mathematics. Maybe it is applicable to some people. What is applicable to one person may not be applicable to another. So I was, for most part of my masters, I would say, really very well with memorizing the formulas. But then when I came to know about, let's say, for example, tables of integrals, there are books written on tables of integrals, which are like 1,000 pages now. And it just contain evaluation of integrals, one after the other. When I came to such things, even books like, there is this National Handbook of Mathematical Functions by Stegen and Abramovich, where all of the formulas are listed. I was like, okay, maybe I don't need to memorize them. I can actually anytime go back and see them, but I should at least memorize, or I should at least know where that formula is given or where that particular topic would be given, so that I can actually go and study this. So as far that is as far as referencing is concerned. Now, your second part of the problem is one cannot solve problems if they don't remember the possible paths to solutions. So I would say for that, the only way is solving as much problems as you can. And believe me, even as an instructor, I really feel that when I'm teaching this semester a real analysis course from Rudin's book, there are many examples that I did not solve back when I was a student. And I'm getting that opportunity now. So I try to give as many different problems as I could, as I can. And that is helping me understanding various ways in which people approach problems. So I think solving problems would give you those ideas, and plus reading various books.
Thank you.
Okay. The next is for Karan Veer Singh. He asked, what is the difference he feels in the curriculum in foreign versus Indian universities? For higher studies, how can one decide that from which place we should go for? Any suggestion regarding that? I think he's broadly asking about the curriculum flexibility, probably, which in India, maybe we are a little bit rigid about the curriculum. Whereas we'll find more flexible system about the selection of courses, minor and major courses in the foreign universities. Probably this is the question Karan want to ask.
Yeah, actually, Professor Rana has very correctly pointed that out, that it probably is the flexibility on what kind of courses you want to take, catering to what your needs and what your passions are. Okay, so that kind of flexibility you will be having, but things are fast changing here as well. So I'm really happy that now we have that kind of flexibility. I mean, maybe not 100% whatever flexibility they have, but to a large extent, if we are liking any course, like here at IIT Gandhinagar, there are so many BTech students who, after their BTech degree, they can actually do a dual degree in mathematics. So it is BTech MSc dual degree. So those are really those kids who are passionate about mathematics, and during their second or third or fourth year of their engineering, they have already taken most of the master's courses, and so they can stay for one more year and then complete all of the requirements of their master's. So that kind of flexibility in degree programs is also there, and even flexibility in terms of attending courses or auditing some courses, all of that is there. Now, in terms of basic courses that are required for you to get a master's or for you to get a PhD, there may be some stringent requirements in here, I mean, in universities in our nation, but I think that is also fast changing.
The next question is about Meenal, and she want to ask, I would like to ask about applied part. So when started to go into rigorous mathematics method, one should start from the scratch or just look for that particular method which has to be applied. I have fear about learning rigorous methods because engineering problems make more sense to me. This is the question of Meenal.
So Meenal, it is not completely necessary to understand all of the things with full rigor if you are planning to not go into mathematics and planning to remain in engineering. Because, for example, physicists, not even engineers, we're talking about physicists. Physicists are not concerned about, first of all, I should say that I'm not undermining them, please don't get me wrong, but they are not concerned about when an order of summation or integration can be interchanged, or when the order of limit and integration can be interchanged. I mean, they just do it. If you get a divergent series later on, you know that, okay, that may be a problem. And then you have to probably look at uniform convergence and things like that. So it's not 100% necessary. However, if you would want to go into mathematics, then yes, that will be required. At least at some point of time, you will face the need to go over that in detail.
And I think, Meenal, I think it's about, as you mentioned about learning things, there are many things that we learn with time. As I've already mentioned, it's a process. For example, I've been teaching number 3 for a long time. This time also when I'm teaching, I realize, okay, I'm using random number, and random number comes from, different aspect. You might want to generate random number for different areas. So when you hear general public lecture, it helps a lot. So make this habit. Even sometimes it's not related to your fields. Sometimes the people who are talking about PD or integration or any other subject. So, I mean, this is how I started learning. Whenever you get an opportunity and if you can spare time, so definitely attend those talks. Lot of rigorous things that we consider it as rigorous, we'll come to know about those things by listening in the talk. Because when we learn self-learn, we sometimes don't know what the things are happening. Many expert, I mean, makes things very easy for us to, learn about that topic, what is doing this thing about. So that's nice.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We have this question by Aryaman Kalia. He says, I would like to ask whether that practicing pure mathematics help in one's problem solving capacity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that is true. Because if you are practicing pure mathematics, then you are trying to be as much rigorous as you can. And that often leads to new insights into problem solving. There are a number of examples, and I think where having knowledge of pure mathematics really helped in solving problems, even in applied area. Yeah.
And I think when, especially in mathematics, as Sir has clearly pointed out, it's a language. So when you write the language into very logical argument with the logical reasoning, you yourself will understand that even theoretical maths will allow you to, reasoning in the correct way. Whenever we are solving a problem, it's more about a trick. You may apply certain tricks to get the answer of that particular problem. But when you are giving proofs or when you are studying theoretical maths, it's more about logical, about a generic argument. So there is another question of Mr. Amit Panwar. I think he asked something very diverse. I'm not sure if you are aware about that. Even I'm not aware about
I'm
that.
not.
So this is about new education policy 2020. Please put some light on changes in higher education taking its reference. I'm not sure if you want to
Unfortunately,
answer.
Amit, I don't.
So we'll skip this one, no issues. There is one student, Shrishti, I think she's the last one. Probably she want to ask a question directly to you. Shrishti, you can unmute yourself and you can ask.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So actually, sir, as you told that there were times when you felt like quitting the degree or you were frustrated. So there are times in my life and even every student's life where we study new courses and we don't understand how to cope up with the new things or the new concepts that we are studying. So how to cope up with the whole situation and study smoothly during that time.
So I would say, first of all, take help of your instructors, take help of your colleagues. Many a times I have noticed that I have lost when I was hesitating to talk with certain instructor because he was too senior and I was not very comfortable approaching him or her. But I have lost there because that particular thing was not clear to me then. So if I mean, I would say now I have changed somewhat, so I don't hesitate. Maybe I'll pester that person a lot, but I'll try to get that clear in my head. That actually is a good strategy. I mean, I see many students who do that, and it is the instructor won't be minding at all, right? I mean, if you have certain things that are not clear, and that is where it is causing difficulty for you to go further and understand things, then please reach out to people. I mean, reach out to your students, reach out to your colleagues, reach out to your instructors. And also nowadays you have these forums like Mathematics Stack Exchange, where you can really take help of people all around the world. Okay, and they are really very kind. I mean, I have seen people asking some questions which maybe the other people would not have entertained that much. But people are very kind. I mean, they say, okay, you refer to that one. This has already been discussed in this other thread. And so Mathematics Stack Exchange is really another good idea where you are anonymous, right? You don't know. I mean, nobody knows who you are. So feel free to ask questions. If it is more of a fundamental nature, I mean, of course, you should approach your instructor. He or she will be welcoming you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So we got one more question, and we are taking too much of time, but
No.
I think it seems to be the last one. So
Sure.
this has been asked from Sukhneet, and she asked how to gain knowledge about advanced mathematics, how to figure out whether a topic is acceptable in our field or not.
So maybe you could explain me what do you mean by acceptable?
Sukhneet, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure, ma'am. Good evening, sir, and good evening, everyone present. Sir, to begin with, I would like to mention that I thoroughly enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Reason being, it was completely unfiltered and straight from the heart. And there were some points which even I could relate to that even a human being, especially the points of where you mentioned that you were afraid to be a supervisor for a PhD student for the very first time. And these are such fear which I face or maybe face when I have become a supervisor, although I have just done my post-graduation right now. So recently I have done my thesis in fractional derivatives.
Okay.
So somewhere around there are talks going on in the field that maybe this is not acceptable. This is a vague concept or something. Although a lot of research has been done in this field, various applications are being there, but still there is a suspicion that whether this can be categorized into a a full developed field of mathematics or not. So I came to know about this problem or query only after I had started doing my research. And there are various other research like fuzzy mathematics also, where the community does not accept them with open arms. So now our career is almost at stake when we start doing PhD or our thesis, and it becomes very difficult to take a U-turn and then start from a scratch. So how to actually judge that whether the field we are going in is acceptable or not?
So I think there are many good journals which have such kind of information, which might be helpful for all of us. And that is, there are journals like Notices of American Mathematical Society or Mathematical Gazette, and which actually have selective articles which cater to broad audience and tells what all I mean, they are in some fields which are really being studied quite a lot, and experts are writing those articles. So it is really something to get information about. And plus, later pages of Notices of AMS and other journals, they really are concerned with, okay, workshop on this, workshop on that. And another thing I would say is, again, taking help from, first of all, MathSciNet, which is Mathematical Reviews. Having access to that is really a boon, because we can actually get to know who is doing what in our area, how recent is it, where is it published, and how many people are citing this. Those who are citing those papers, what are they working on? And I mean, even if you do not have MathSciNet, I think Google Scholar does it, but Google Scholar has a lot of unfiltered things as well. So the ones which are completely relevant to mathematics, but which may come a little later, like Google Scholar, everything you write some paper on arXiv, it gets cited in Google Scholar.
Yes.
So there also from there you can get to know. I mean, I make it a habit, and I also tell my students, though I myself am now for a few days not being able to keep in touch with that, is to every day look in arXiv what papers have come in number theory, in combinatorics, and in classical analysis and ODEs. I mean, those are the areas where I work on. So that's why every day we try to see what all things, and then we discuss among ourselves with my students and my postdocs. I mean, we all discuss that, okay, today this guy published a paper on these partitions, and he has done this. So it actually is in our mind that, okay, this is already done. What are they saying about it? Or some problem that was really solved since many years, or some area where there has been a lot of development. What additional things people have done? All of that information on arXiv, you have this. First of all, the nice thing is that it is open to all, and the other thing is that every day there are some new papers coming. So from there we can even see what all areas are being studied in today, and what all areas people are not studying right now. But what I say is that even if you have that fear, say now in fractional derivatives or in the other areas, people are not working, maybe try to get an expert opinion. I mean, as in somebody who really has been a well-known person in that. Because, say, for example, even in certain areas that I am interested in, like, for example, I did talk about Euclidean geometry, right? So
Yes,
I worked on it since so many years, did some research in there, but now that is not studied at all. So that I came to know when I went to masters, or I think towards late masters. I was disappointed, to tell you the truth, because I was really interested in it, but that was not the only thing, right? So I have branched out. Fortunately, or it happened in such a way that from interest in special functions, I slowly came to Q series, and then from Q series, naturally I was led to partitions. Even today, I feel I am really a beginner in combinatorial arguments. I don't know how to give bijective proofs of certain partition identities. I'm not that comfortable. Though whatever little I have worked on, that actually helped me branch out in this area. I mean, I'm now really very thankful to people like George Andrews and HIE, with whom uh, I was very fortunate to work with. And working with them itself, I learned a lot. I mean, so you may also think of adding a new dimension apart from what you're working on. That will really help you. Initially, it can be something somewhat related to what you're doing, and slowly you can branch out of it. And I mean, if you at all plan on doing that, that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dikshit sir. Sukhneet, I think there is one Professor A.M. Mathai. I think he is at McGill University, Canada, and I do not know his current location, but you can definitely look at his article. He did a lot of work on fractional derivatives. And during one of the conference, I heard him, sharing this experience of about special function. And he said that when I was doing this problem, one particular problem, and I was trying to solve it using the special function and the concept that he did in fractional derivative, the guy who was actually a foreigner or maybe a collaborator at that time, he refused, applying this technique, because they thought that if I'll apply this technique, my work will be considered as degraded. But Professor Mathai didn't agree. And he later on published a lot of work on this topic. So again, I would say sometimes there is nothing about, a topic which do not have a value. It's about probably what sort of problem are we solving out of that, and how rigorous that problem is, and how much applicable that problem is in the mathematics. If somebody is solving like a recipe and you're just taking out paper out of paper without its real application or the rigorous, then I think it's just like solving simple questions, and we lose actually the ethos of research. Okay, so it's not only about publishing paper, it's about maybe sometimes it seems simple, we could not solve it earlier, and then you propose a problem. So whenever we talk about a field, it's more about problem oriented and how we are tackling that problem. So if you can email, maybe I can just send you some of the link to him, and you can then explore about some topic on this fractional derivatives.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, I think that was the last question, and thank you, sir. This has been a really pleasant, and it was a really nice talk, and I'm really happy that people have get involved. They had so many queries to ask, and I'm sure you could have answer to all. I mean, you answered all of them, and they enjoyed this talk a lot. So on behalf of all the participants who are present here and those who left, of course, after the talk, it was just a question now later on. I want to thank you again on behalf of everybody, on Thapar Mathematical Society, on behalf of School of Mathematics and TIT. And it's really pleasure for us and honor for us, for you to take out some time for us and be available here for this 2 hours almost. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah. Thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed interacting with all of you. And thanks again for organizing the talk.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I look forward sometime again in future for more interaction. And I'm very happy to see some of your students, colleagues also sitting in this meeting. So thank you to all for joining this session.